Me and Emma work, we basically manage the PSU like labs and make kind of makerspace digital fabrication spaces for the PSU College of the Arts. So we're going to be kind of using their 3D scanners today. And we're just going to be going over to the next building, which Shattuck Hall, which has our facilities over there. We're going to be bringing SETI 3D scanners, which we'll set up over there, but we also have ours set up. And we're going to be kind of like 3D scanning used to be terrible. The software used to be terrible. It was a very frustrating, long process. Like the last 5 years, it's gotten a lot better. There are scanning apps. If you have a fancy iPhone, there's the LiDAR scanners. They tend to be a little bit globby, but they are free, and a lot of people have them in their pocket. And we can kind of go over that a little bit later, because they can be really useful, especially if you're out in the field. You're like, I just want to capture this object real quick. The ones we have are kind of semi-professional scanners. The price of 3D scanners can go. People have laser scanners, which for architecture, which can go up to millions of dollars. But for artists, like this is kind of like a nice middle ground, or for like a lab type situation. We're going to be using small 3D scanners that will tabletop. We have one here, and we have nearly identical one over in Shattuck, which is could scan things about the size of a grapefruit. And then we have a handheld scanner, which will scan, the size of, meant for scanning bodies, but you can scan any large object up to like 10 meters. And like we'll go over some strategies to do that. We're going to kind of like, if people brought objects today, it'd be great, because it's really easy to kind of like look at different objects and decide how you have to scan them, what the strategies are. And before, you would pretty much have to spray paint everything white and lose your object, which nowadays that's not as much the case. These scanners can pick up a lot of detail in difficult objects. You could work completely digitally. This is kind of like an easy way to capture complex objects for people who might not have the skill set of doing extensive 3D modeling or 3D animation. So that's becoming a lot more accessible. So we'll kind of use this as kind of like a workflow that we've been using here for artists to capture stuff. And then we'll go over some tools to modify your models, combine models, how to use appropriation, and stuff later in the afternoon to like, and then we'll kind of go briefly over 3D printing, and kind of the concept here is like, if you finish your scan today in your model, like we can start your 3D prints today. We have 7 3D printers, so we're going to have to kind of schedule the prints. The mold making demo is on Monday. If you have the 3D prints on Monday, you can then make your entire mold. If not, we have a week to make your molds. And if you can make more than one mold or whatever if you have time. We can also, in the mold making, as we'll talk, you can actually go from like organic objects or anything that will burn out, so you don't have to work digitally. But it's kind of like we're just kind of showing a digital workflow, because that's more, this is an emerging tech, institute, and that's kind of like a more exciting way of and it's been really good with the 3D prints and made beautiful castings, and I think that's kind of the way we're kind of going in our workflow in the future here. And it's been really accessible to students, and it's like a lot easier than having, some people who can work with their hands, so you can make wax sculptures and stuff, but this is like become a lot easier to make really detailed, high quality work without a lot of like background in sculpting first. Does that all make sense? Cool. So we're gonna walk over to Shattuck Hall, which is the next over. And this might be a little on the small side, but we can definitely give this a shot. So we have 2 choices here in texture and non-texture scan. What texture scan is going to basically capture the colors and what the actual object looks like. But since we're 3D printing, we don't need that data, because it's going to be a white piece of plastic and then it's going to be in bronze. So but if you're going for something like VR or something like that, you could capture the surface texture. And then texture in a 3D modeling standpoint just means the colors and kind of like basically the JPEG or whatever the bitmap that's going to be put on top of the model to make it look like So usually here for we're going to use non-texture, but if you want your scan for something else also, feel free to use texture. It's just going to take up a little more space on the hard drive and require a little bit more time, but for what we're doing here, we don't need texture. All right, so we put the object in the center, and so when we scan this, it's going to turn it around on the turntable, and it's going to take a few minutes, and we'll set that up right here. And first thing we'll notice is the brightness. What we see here is there's a little bit of red, and that's where it's like overblown out. And if we go down, that doesn't happen. If we go all the way up, we see it's all red. So we want to be right at the edge of the detail. And we can do, sometimes we'll have to do, depending on the color of the object, we'll have to do scans a little bit more blown out and it'll add them together. But generally you want just a touch right at the point where it's blowing out detail. So something just like that. And shinier objects are going to be harder to scan. because they're reflective, and basically, remember, it's trying to figure out the grid on it, and if the grid is being reflected or it's giving other like nonsense information, it's going to be harder for it to interpret the scan. So things that are matte white is going to be the easiest in your world, and things that are furry and reflective are going to be the hardest. But they're doable. Something we have here that we'll go over if anyone brought a difficult object. There's a spray paint that we have that's meant for 3D scanning, which you coat it white, but it evaporates off in a few hours and doesn't hurt the object. So it's just like, not the most non-toxic thing. We will definitely do this outside. We don't have a spray booth, so we kind of have to do that on the down low in the skate park. So right now we're going to do turntable. I'll show you some, when we don't have something that can spin easily, we can turn this off, take individual frame pictures. It's a little bit more difficult. In the align mode, we have turntable align and features. We're going to use features that tends to work better because that's basically going to be like, that works great on objects that are not repetitive or, so things that are like, if you have something that's like five columns in a row, it's not going to, like, since in the features, it's going to be like, oh, it's column, oh, this must be the same object, and it's going to get confused. So it's kind of trying to look at the geometry and like, oh, this is the same. This, things like that, like when we'll do that over there, that works great with things like people, because people are not, even when they're symmetrical, the sides are not really symmetrical. So it can pick up the details and be like, okay, that's something different. And we get in the people scanning, we'll show you some ways of how to scan, so you always get multiple features in the scan. But here, this is pretty simple. We're generally going to use the features mode. Turntable steps, this is how many steps it's going to do around and how many angles it's going to capture. If your object has a lot of ins and outs, you want to do this more. Generally, it's also a thing of times. 3D scanning is slow. Since this is a simple object, for the sake of this demo, we're just going to go with like 10. More settings here. Turntable speed is how quickly it goes around. If your object's kind of wobbly, I mean, I just turn this usually down to like 2. This one's pretty stable, so we can leave it at 6, but it just takes a little bit more time. So, and 1 turn or half turn, we generally want to get the whole object. So we're going to just go, all right, start scan and see what happens. And we didn't calibrate this, so if we get a weird octopus, then we know we have to recalibrate. And you'll see it goes through its different patterns on the object, and then it's going to, and you can see how it does back and forth, and you can kind of see, if you come and look, what it's actually capturing on the object. And generally, this is going to be a slow process. Usually, minimum, you have to do 3 scans of every object on this. So most of the time is more like 8, just to kind of get every cranny, nook and cranny kind of set up. So we'll kind of take the first scan and see what we get. And then we can do the second scan and see if that makes it better. And then we can add and subtract scans depending on the quality. So this was our first scan, and like, okay, it actually got some decent detail. Like, obviously it's missing the top, and you can see it's missing the bottom too. But yeah, it looks like it didn't do anything too strange. So we just hit apply edit if everything looks good, or delete data if that was a horrible scan and we want to go on. So we'll hit apply edit, and then we'll move it to a different position. So like, let's put it on its belly, or on its back rather. And then we can go to scan settings, and if we, like, sometimes it's good to vary this because, like, so it's not always taking from the same angle. Because if you move the number of turntable stands, it's going to do slightly different angles each time, which will give it a little bit more detail on the passes. So you can kind of like, oh, that was 10, so let's do it to 8. So then, like, it's going to take the pictures from slightly different angles around it. So you'll get a little bit more detail on the stuff you're rescanning on the sides. So we see this one here. So we got a little bit more detail, and you can see it starting to fill in there. We'll apply edit. And hopefully this will add the 2 scans together. And so the gray is what it did before, blue is what it did before, and gray is what it got new. So you can kind of say like, oh, I found that this time. And we're getting closer. So we can kind of take a look and like, okay, the back of the head, it really doesn't know what's going on. So we're going to have to line it up so we can get to the back of the head. So maybe we stand it up like this. So it's just kind of being strategic, like what is a, and we don't have to get 100%. It will make up the data that you don't get. And if your object is nice, smooth curves, it does a pretty good job. But if your object is not nice, smooth curves and has a lot of complicated geometry, it's just going to blob over the areas it doesn't understand. We'll get a file out of this that can be opened in any 3D program. Any 3D program can then export to that, and we can go to the 3D printers with that. So that's kind of our workflow, is just to stay in the STL OBJ land. There's a lot of complicated things that aren't going to be in STL. It's basically just a mesh of triangles, to be overly simplified. But sometimes it's important that like when you send it, sometimes the scale gets lost in STL files. So always let me know before you print exactly how big you want it, because sometimes that information gets lost. So we can see what we got in that scan, and we didn't get much on the inside of the ears. So, but we'll apply it, can't hurt. And maybe I need to put the brightness the other way. I always get a little confused there. So one more scan, we'll turn the brightness up and see. I think I just did that backwards. Yeah, so we'll get it until we can see the ears, and we'll try that.
The two demos I'm going to give today are, try to keep it pretty simple, but there's the bucket process and then there's the mound process. So I'm going to do two different examples of a mold. So I'm going to use this pyramid for the mound over process because of the geometric space that I can use the bottom as the pour spout. It's flat. And then I'm going to cast this purple wolf. And which shows a little bit more complicated ways of adding and attaching screws to our piece. So we're going to start with wax, but maybe as a little starting point, how do you think we should attach, or what angle do you think the pour spout should go? So they said pour spout right here. So if we did a pour spout right here, that would mean that the metal would come in here and then have to travel back up through these legs, right? If it was just right here. So that means we have to have a sprue air escape at the top of each of these legs to make sure that the topmost point of any object needs to be where the pour spout attaches to. So if we did it this way, that means sprues coming up from all of this base platform. So this is just a really good example of, again, if you're sending the liquid through, the metal through, if it has to travel back up right here, if we're pouring in right here, we're asking it to travel back up, there needs to be an air escape here. Each object, there's a couple different ways to create your sprues, so you all have assistance on that. But I just really recommend spending time with each object, maybe even drawing it out. Try to understand the flow of the metal through the mold, and just to see again, if gravity is on your side, so shaping it in a way that the direction is coming through. Texture, so if I did the pour spout right here, I kind of like that this is flat right here, so it wouldn't be interrupting the texture of my object. So not wanting to put a sprue or an air escape on a really detailed texture part of the object, or it's going to be smoothed out when we cut it off at the end. What's the other one? And then just if there is a more minimal option, it's just easier for you in the end. So you don't want to have to attach 20,000 if you could just switch it and there's two. So just keep it easy for yourself, but just really spend time with each one. All right, I'm gonna head over here. So this is our wax cart right here. It's messy. It's a pretty messy process. Crock pot, I started it about a half hour ago, so it's just ready to go. I'm actually gonna turn it down, maybe even just off now, because it can get really hot and I want the wax to cool pretty quickly, actually. So just give yourself time to let it melt. There are some heated carving tools, and then just some handheld carving tools over here as well to work with. Power strip here that just make sure that this is all turned off, and just turn the switch off before you leave the room, and likely just unplugged as well. And then if you're using anything with heat, There's just a couple little like bricks around here. Plastic table, don't burn the table. This is the plastic cart, don't leave it on the plastic cart or it'll just melt it. So just be aware of the heat in here as well. This is an example of the Dixie cup pour spout. So with the wax sprue going through it to attach. So I'm just gonna show how I made that. But then there's also some other ones we've been playing with. Because these are a little flexible. If your object is kind of having a hard time, paper, who's working with paper again? A more sturdy pour spout might work in favor of a softer object. So it just depends each time, but you can use either one. So we have a bunch of Dixie cups back here, and I'll bring some more over. So there's that. And then we have a couple different size rods of wax. And then these small ones. Say it again?
I said forbidden Twizzlers.
Right? I know, I always feel like, like licorice. So these are 3 sizes to work with. Again, our pour spout is the way that the bronze is going to get to our object. So we always want the pour spout to be attached with a thick sprue to get as most metal coming through at a time. And then the size medium is good for, that's what I'll attach like each of the feet to, like the in-between sprues. And then if you have smaller objects, that's likely when you'll be using these, but good for air escapes, just the light little release of the pocket. I'm going to start by just showing how to get this started because it can take a little bit to cool down. So if I just tried to stick this to the side and I'm trying to press my object into a mixture that we don't want to be, but might likely be entering into peanut butter stage, a lot of pressure, it's very likely that that could just break. So we want to make sure that this connection is really strong and durable and that we have a good handle of the whole object by holding onto this tiny little cup. So instead of attaching it to the side, I'm just going to cut a little hole. The hole a little bit smaller than the wax, so there's not a lot of extra through space. So the longer the attachment, the easier it is to cut off. So if I almost use this, but that's really short, and we're going to be using an angle grinder, which is a tiny little wheel in the metal shop to cut it off. And the shorter this area is to your object, it makes it a little harder to get in there. So I recommend just like a little bit longer, but not like excessively too long, because the longer that is just kind of like making your mold bigger than it needs to be. So you want it to be as direct as possible, but not like too close. And I have this tall enough that I'm actually gonna, when I'm making my mold, I wanna hold on to the sprue and not the cup. So just use it as a little handle, so you're actually, in that way, you're actually holding on to the object and not like the byproduct of it. So there's just a couple different cups over here. I'm gonna just pour this in. You can see it dripping out, so that just means that there's just a little hole when I pushed it through. And so a little trick is, again, this is really hot. So I grabbed a little bit in a little cup that I'm gonna let cool down over here for a little bit, and then I'm gonna pour it in. And hopefully it will slowly just seal the hole in between. Okay, so that's not leaking now. So just by letting it seep through the holes, I kind of like filled it just a little bit. The least amount, if you work with a little bit of wax at a time, it'll cool faster. But if you pour this whole thing with wax, could take like 10 minutes to solidify. So I recommend just doing like little chunks at a time, so you're not holding this thing forever. I'll even like spin it around. Let the room kind of cool down the wax. I'm just moving it around. But things that can happen if you move too fast in this process, or if you put wax in, if it's too hot, it can actually start to melt the sprue that's going through it and then cause it to break in the middle. So just go slow, because this can start to fall over. All right, so it's pretty solidified. I don't want to rush it too much, so I'm just going to let it sit for a second. But then I'm going to do it on the other side to make a little sandwich to hold it steady on both sides. This is going to create a negative space in our mold. This is going to be submerged in that plaster bucket and will be burnt out. So the Dixie cup will be gone. It is just an object to take up space in the mold to carve out the funnel for the bronze to insert into. Yep. So now that I have that, I'm just gonna start attaching sprues upward as well from there. It's helpful to have your object sit flat in some capacity. All right, so I'm going to attach one here. Like so. And like so. And then probably out here and out here. You're making a tree. Okay. I feel pretty good with that right now, so I'm just gonna let that chill for a second. I already knew that these were a little too short. I've learned you can really just simplify the whole thing and just twist them. Make a little braid and then press them together. And then, so you can see that this is pretty thin. So if we're gonna submerge, if we attach this here, and we submerge this in a pretty thick powder or plaster mixture, it's likely that this can just break off. So it's best, instead of having this just like willy-nilly existing out here and possibly falling off, to I might actually do this size for my air escape, it's fine. Whatever yours needs. But I think my surface is big enough, and to have it as secure as possible, I can wrap this around. Thank you. So instead of having this just like existing out here, I'm going to actually bend it.
So it has 2 points of connection?
So it can connect to the cup. The part of the cup that will not be the pour spout, because this is going to exist up at the surface. If this is the top of our mold right here, going across here, I will attach it so it's stable and not floating all over the place, but it exists outside of the pour spout. That make sense? Sweet. So, thank you. I'm just gonna, I think I can do this part. Thank you. I'm just gonna chisel these off. I'd rather just use a handheld tool so they scrape right off and not melt it. But after that, I feel, after I attach that in the same way, we'll make the mold. Okay, that's a good time for maybe a break, and I'll finish this, and then we'll do the actual molder. So got that all attached and just hooked over on top. And then I have the little pyramid, how simple it can be and how complex it can be. So I'm gonna show that process as well. So depending on what your scale is, we are gonna be using paper buckets as our mold, or tar paper, like industrial roofing paper. So, or a combination of the two. And then we'll always mix our material in a plastic bucket, because we're working with water, liquid, plastic paper buckets. It can disintegrate it, cause this to crack or fall apart. So we always mix in plastic bucket and then pour our finished mixture of plaster into a paper container for our mold, so then we can rip it off after it's a solid rock. So one-time use for each of these. So if we have something very simple, I don't have any examples in here, but if we were doing a bunch of scans of people and they were like little sculptures like this big, pour spout, we could just use this as the mold, as long as the pour spout was able to sit in here and it's 2 inches on all sides. I know my object is bigger than this, so that's not possible. But if you're doing a really thin, simple object that can fit in here with 2 inches around all sides, 2 inches here, so elevated 2 inches, and 2 inches all the way around, you can use this. And if you need just a little bit extra, it's like 2 inches, like, cause it's super thin, but maybe it's a little taller, you can add tar paper to it to elongate this. And then we also have these paper buckets, so the same thing. If you're working with an object that can do 2 inches all around, just fine, and then have the pour spout be able to be submerged in there, you can just use paper bucket just as it is. But it's likely that that won't be the case for everybody. So I'm going to show what you would need to do to create your own bucket, which is using tar paper here. So I can grab my form and say, "2 inches from the bottom, at least." And maybe just a little bit bigger just in case. So here, I'm just saying about 2 inches here, and then I'm gonna cut that all the way around. And then I will try not to waste, so I'm going to put this down sideways. Thank you. And maybe just simple wrap burrito. See how much I'm going to need. Again, shoot bigger, just in case. Tar paper is reusable, so you can save it if you don't cut it. If this runs out, there's more just right over there. I have a very clean edge, and I have a very not clean edge. So you always want the flat side to be on the bottom. And I'm gonna double check to make sure I did that right. And I see about 2 inches on all sides. And again, I'm holding it from here when I pick it up, which is connected to everything. If you hold it here and it's moving, you need to fix it. You want to be able to hold it and feel like you can put pressure on it and it's secure. All right, so I have my bucket and I want it to be flat. I'm going to use just some blue tape. And make sure the bottom's aligned flat. It's good to hook it over. And hook it over again. So I have a flat. I'm going to do the same thing in the other side because we're going to fill this with plaster. So we just want to make sure that that is not going to, this little flap isn't going to come into our mold. We want it to just be the surface of it. Okay, feel pretty good. There's going to be a lot of pressure that we're going to be putting in here. So either way, whether it's this, you're using this, or with this, we are always going to be using wire around it to hold it secure so it doesn't break the seam on this or on this. And at least 2, but 3 is good if you're making it from scratch. Some wire cutters here. I'm just going to wrap one around and just twist it. With this wire, we are able to shape our mold too. So say the moon or the circular yours, that's a very flat, round, so we don't need it like to be a circle. We can actually like shape the mold with this to be more oval shaped, so you're not wasting plaster on the side. So that's due to the wire. But I'm not making a circle, I'm not making an oval. One on bottom, one on top, and then one in the middle. So if everybody maybe just wants to come up and look inside at this point and just see what I mean by the 2 inches all the way around. So my cup can be here on the edge, and I see 2 inches from the bottom. If I made a mold where my object is touching the bottom, that is a funnel all the way through your mold, and it will come out the bottom. So you need to make sure that you have 2 inches on all sides. Okay, so now if you look at the bottom, you can see there's a gap. So we're going to be working with the plaster, and if I poured the plaster I printed the stages of plaster out if you guys want to pass it around. But again, we're going to be starting with water and then adding powder, and it's going to turn it into this super liquidy, milky substance. If we just poured that mixture into this right now, it would just come out the bottom. So when we are making a bucket from scratch, we need to make a bottom first. So we're actually going to, that's what I'm going to do now before we go to lunch, is make a little tiny mixture of all of the same steps that we're going to do for the big pour, but put it in the bottom when it's at peanut butter state. so it doesn't leak out the bottom.
Wrap around the tar paper?
Inside. So the chicken wire is that armature. Here, let me try to. Thank you. So the chicken wire is the armature, just like the Ludo and the sand that we're going to be adding, that is going to hold the pretty brittle plaster from expanding and breaking like we saw in the sand pit. So this is a metal bucket that's technically to hold the plaster together. And yeah, good, thanks for bringing that over. So I can probably make this a little bit smaller. All right, and since the point of these is to not let the plaster expand, instead of these being flaps just touching each other, they need to be wrapped around each other. And kept it a little higher because these, when we are putting the mold inside the kiln, we're going to be putting them upside down, like so. And if we have a little bit of chicken wire sitting out, it can act as a little stilts, to keep the pour spout exposed, instead of having to like balance it on all the bricks, which we still need to do, but a little bit of chicken wire just kind of helps. Makes it a little bit easier to handle as well. So I'm just going to cut this down now. But we want it to be all the way wrapped around and fastened into each other. Okay, so now with that shell like patty that we're gonna make, I wanna make sure that that's in there so it's securely fastened. And then I'm just gonna double check one more time. And I'm still good. Here is, we're gonna mix some plaster now. So here's a little ratio sheet to help with the next part. So I have a bucket that's about the size of my mold. So I think I'm gonna be, at least for the patty, I'm just gonna use this. But when you are going to make your full batch, you just want to make sure that your bucket that you're mixing in is bigger than your mold, or you're not going to have enough. You want to make all of your plaster that you need for your full mold in one batch and not add it on top. So we have these big jugs underneath here, and then a hand mixer over there to make a larger batch. But what you can do is use this for an idea. Like, that's about the size of my mold, but I don't want it to overflow. So maybe I could fill this up with water and then pour it into a bigger container so you know what you need. But some folks aren't gonna be coming back, right? Okay, so I'm gonna maybe try to include all of that then. So I'm gonna fill this up with water, and the water to end it up and plaster is almost double in size. So if I was using this, I would just fill this up with water a little bit more than halfway. Probably like like 3/5 maybe. Because it will add. So it's better to have more than you need than not enough, because it won't, your whole object, I could pour it in and my object might only get covered to here, and then that half is gonna solidify to solid rock, and then I'm gonna mix another one and that's gonna be solid rock. And what that actually means is 2 solid rocks sitting on top of each other and not 1 solid rock. So if you get to that place, make a little bit more than you need, but don't overdo it, because plaster is the one thing we cannot recycle, and just, it's a mess. So just try to spend time with it. But if you are in the situation where your object is in and it's not all the way poured in, that's a really good time to like reach out to somebody else in the room and say, hey, I really need assistance like right now real quick. Can you grab me some water? Let me mix a little batch and add it in as quickly as you can, instead of waiting for it to solidify. So buddy system in here, really recommend it. So if this is our size bucket that we're making our mold, we need 1/3 of sand and 1/3 of Ludo. So sand is in this bucket, and then Ludo are these 3 buckets, and then this is our plaster here. So, and again, Ludo is just recycled molds after the burnout, so free of moisture. All right, so this is our plaster. And this is the lid. The lid should always be on the plaster. It just got really full, and we're using it. But if any moisture gets into this whole batch is ruined. Because going over the steps of plaster again, it's like milk to yogurt to soft serve ice cream to peanut butter to cookies and cream, and then cookie dough, and you cannot go back. So as soon as the water and plaster mix, this chemical reaction is starting immediately. So whenever you're starting this process, especially when you're making a big one, make sure that you give yourself an hour, technically like 30 minutes to an hour, to dedicate yourself to this process, because there's no walking away from it or you ruin the batch. So just make sure that you're ready to go and not rushing yourself. And then I'd also just check your sleeves. All right, so if we all look into the bucket right now, it's just water. And I'm going to slowly sprinkle plaster in, and it turns super cloudy. This time I want you to look at how fast the plaster is sinking.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? It's just dissolving right into the water. Again, this process is strictly visual. Right now the plaster is hitting the water and dissolving right away. What we are looking for is an island of plaster sitting on top.
Oh, now I remember this.
Because the more dense, it's okay, the more dense the plaster gets, the more it will rise to the top.
And it doesn't need to be sitting at the bottom?
So I'm sprinkling it because it's slowly mixing itself right now.
So it doesn't need to be stirred.
No. So you do not want to touch the mixture until you see islands. If you see islands,
Now we're getting islands.
yep, so it's starting now. but they're still sinking. We want to make sure that we see an island that has like a shore around it. Okay, so the visual that I'm looking for is like right here, where there's an island, but there's like a shore around it. So let me put a little bit more in. Right, you can see the underside that it started to build on the bottom. Slowly letting it dissolve, and then I'm just gonna start mixing. And I'm gonna just show with one finger on this clean hand. You always wanna keep one hand clean. One dip. This is plaster that's not all the way mixed. I can like see my skin coming through, and it's just not equally mixed. So what I'm doing in here is just feeling for all of the different clumps, if there is any. I'm rubbing my hand against the sides to get all the plaster that's just sitting up against the surface, up going against the bottom, and just giving it a good mix. And then I can dip another finger and see that it's much more consistent. And if you can see any transparency in the plaster, that means it's either not mixed all the way, try mixing it a little bit more, or then you would need to add a little bit more plaster. Will you actually grab me one more little tiny scoop? Thank you. We don't want to do this, but if you do the dip test and you see transparency and you keep mixing and you're seeing it look like that, this is only because my hand has been exposed to different, that's why we always have a dry hand. But if your hand looks like this with your dip test, you need to add more plaster. But now the plaster just sits on top.
How did you know you needed more?
I don't need more right now. I'm just kind of showing you, but you would if it's transparent, if you can see your skin. But if you already mix it with your hand and then add more plaster, it's just a different consistency that now if I go in, I can literally grab it. Because it's like almost, not rejecting it, but like kind of. Yeah. So you really want to not mix it until the end and really take your time with the islands. Milk. And I'm gonna add sand first, and I've never used wet sand before, so we'll see. And that's probably enough for that. So now it's milky, but with a little bit of grit. I might add a little bit more. So there can be little bubbles of the sand, so you just want to get everything mixed in. Okay? And if you're coming back, or if you're not able to come back for the full pour, this is where I would recommend doing a dip of your object if you want a lot of extra details. Or you're concerned about like the texture of your object. Do a dip when it's as milky as possible. You can do it when it's just plaster too, but just don't do it before just do it before the Ludo, and then just set it aside. Again, it's not necessary, but if you have a lot of details, this is going to be able to get into all the different crevices of your project. And then as soon as I add this dehydrated Ludo, it's going to start soaking up all the moisture and speeding it up, the curing process up really quickly. So when you're doing your larger batch, it's like do the dip test, get it good, and then put your Ludo in, mix, 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 pour it into your bucket as quickly as possible and get your object in there, because you have about 5 minutes sometimes before you start fighting it. So I'm gonna just pour this in. This is exactly what you want your plaster and full mixture to look like when you submerge your object. Where it's liquid enough where I can put my hand in and take it out, and the mixture is responding to my hand or whatever I dip in there. It's not fighting me, it's not putting any pressure against it. My hand is just able to go in there and the plaster is building around it. And since you're gonna be gone too, you would put your object in and tap the side of your project to get any liquid movement to fill in all the little crevices.
Got it.
So again, I'm just pouring this into here. So I could so I'm just gonna go really slow. But overall, I do want to see it come out the bottom because that is sealing it. I don't want it to come volcanoing out the bottom, but I want to know that it came underneath the tar and is holding it. So let's see what happens here. So it's starting to like bulge out right here. That's what would happen if I didn't. So I'm gonna let it sit there for a second. And, oops, sorry. Maybe even just move my hands around to get it into all of the crevices all around. Not really that liquidy anymore. I'm gonna just put this, I'm just gonna keep it in my hand. But since I'm making just a patty right now that I'm gonna be putting, so this is gonna be a solid rock that we're gonna put a solid rock on top of, I'm gonna make like a lemon meringue pie topping so it hooks into it.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now would be a good time, I'm just mostly showing you the dynamic of plaster, but now would be a wonderful time for you to wash your hands. And I'm just gonna dip it in this bucket. That's a rock now. And you can pass it around if you would like.
Oh, wow.
Well, first off, like all your molds are currently baking in the kiln at 1,000 degrees, and they'll be baking for like 2 days, and so and we should be left with a hollow shell at the end of it. And then on Thursday, we're going to do the bronze pour, 10 a.m. And we have that kiln is loaded to the brim, so we're probably going to end up doing 4 pours. So it's probably going to be a 6-hour day. There's a lot of sitting around and waiting, so we'll go through the demo. We'll load it up. We'll get the crucible lit, and then we'll have to sit there wait 45 minutes for the bronze to melt to get up to 2200. And then there'll be 5 minutes of us pouring really quickly, and then we'll reset and do the entire process again. So there'll be a lot of like 5 minutes of intensity, 45 minutes of sitting around. So bring some knitting or something. It's going to be one of those kind of days. But if you want to participate and actually do the pouring, you should be wearing all cotton clothing or all natural fibers. If there is an accident, you will be in fire suits, but even if there's an accident, if you catch your clothes on fire, anything that's polyester will melt to your skin and cause horrible burns, where cotton will just burn off of you. Also, anytime you're working in the studio, like on Friday or whatever, you should always be wearing closed-toed shoes, so no sandals. Make sure that's just all the standard OSHA regulations. I'm just going to do the kind of demo. We have one mold that we found that someone never opened.
Oh,
so
perfect.
I'm going to go through the opening process, how to open your molds up, and then we'll go over some basic metal finishing today, how to take off the pour spout, how to do some, and then how to do some polishing, and how to, we're going to be using a chemical bath to clean up the oxides on it and stuff like that. So we're going to go through that and how to do that. So you're all ready on Friday. You can come in, just open your molds, have a big party, and and then just work through the rest of it. Does that sound good? So the first thing we're going to do is this is already slightly cracking, so that's kind of on our side. But we kind of want to like lightly start breaking this down. So we're just going to like 2 fingers, just like little snaps in a circle. And we're not whaling on it yet. When you have a bigger mold, you're going to have to use more force. Like this is small and also kind of crappily made. But you know, if your mold is well made, it's going to be a bit more resistant. But you're going to kind of walk it down until it kind of gets these spiderweb cracks. And this can kind of like start loosening out. And then you'll just use a little bit more force. In breaking off your first goal is to get the chicken wire out. And oh great, this is a failed mold. So this is typically what it's going to look like once you break it out. So you're going to have all this little plaster in here. We don't have a way to set up a pressure washer here because there's no, we currently don't have a pressure washer set up here. But if you have a pressure washer at home, this is really easy with a pressure washer. So I would recommend you just go take it home and put it in your driveway, and this will take you 30 seconds. But you know, if not, like what you have is this little tool here. So this is what you can start getting out the big chunks. Oops. And remember, like this is steel, this is bronze. If you're hammered too hard, you will mark your piece. I mean, so don't go bam, bam, bam. Like just small taps. Like this pick tool, so you can go in and get out the big sections. And when you get down to a little bit, you can soak this in a bucket of water, and a lot of the fine plaster dust will come off. All right, so let's head over to the metal shop. So we have a piece that, you know, hopefully would be, this looks like it did go through an acid, so we had the black off, and it sat around for a while, so it's gotten more oxides back on it. And we have 4 compounds here, and these go from 4 came in a set. I've never actually used black emery. I think that's kind of aggressive. I mean, you could try it, but I'm just going to start with the brown Tripoli. And these are basically like grades of sandpaper. You're going up like finer and finer, and the red rouge doesn't actually remove any material. It just does burnishing. So that's a final mirror polish thing. And we have these wheels set up, so they should correspond right down the line. This I can tell is white diamond on here, so not quite sure what's going on. But one thing that's important is never to mix your polishing compounds on the wheels, because if you put like black emery on something that had white diamond on it, now it's a black emery wheel. Like you'll always have those particles in it. And when you load the wheels, like the last class I was in here was overloading these to like an extreme. You just want to put like a little bit of material on here. Like if you overcharge it, all you're going to do is just splatter onto your piece, and then you're going to have to remove it from your piece. And it's annoying. And also, that being said, you're going to want to wipe your piece down with any of these cloths around here between going from station to station, so you're not taking the remnants on your piece and loading up the wheel with a harsher compound, because then you're just continually scratching your piece. Like it's like putting like 200 sandpaper in the middle of the 600. This has been kind of a conceptual problem for people using the shop, so just kind of like make sure you have some cleanliness between there, and make sure you know what compound is on there. And they should be in line here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. This has white diamond on it, and this has brown Tripoli. I can see that just by how they look. All right. So when charging these wheels up, this probably has enough here, but I'll just kind of show. And we also have, like, depending on your piece, whether you use these or these little guys in a Dremel is going to depend on your piece. So likely this is kind of a piece I should probably be doing with the Dremel, but I'm just going to demo it on the big wheels just because, yeah, it's a Dremel. It's the same principle. Just when you charge one up, try to label it with a piece of tape so the next person, if it's still usable. A lot of these are kind of like one use, and you're going to burn through the entire wheel. But like if it's still in good shape, just take a little piece of tape and label what compound's on it, so we don't end up with a bunch of, like, as we can see here, mystery compounds on mystery ones. And okay, and our power situation's a little janky here, so you kind of have to find the extension cord and plug it in. So if it doesn't turn on, that's what's going on. So and when loading this, I'm just going to use this like a pencil and kind of load a little bit on there until I can see it. That's all you need. You don't need to like load this on. Also, don't push it down the center so you make a huge channel with this, because then you just waste it for the next person. So got my brown Tripoli on there. And it's always important to brace the piece with your left hand, because this is going to spin and want to push it down into the ground, or your offhand, or depending on the piece, you got to use whatever hand. And you always kind of, because this is spinning down, you always want to come a little bit below the piece, because this is where it's going to do the work. And you can see immediately it's shining. So, and you're going to do the most work with the brown Tripoli. That's going to do the bulk, and the rest are going to be a little bit easier. So this is what you're going to do to get the, most of your time should be spent on the first wheel. And until it's all like how you want it, don't move on to the next wheel. Those are just finishing the process, so most of your time is going to be spent with the first wheel. And you don't want to shove it way in like this. That doesn't do more work, that just deposits like polishing compound on your piece, which you then have to clean up. So you always, all the work is going to be, because like it's spinning faster at the edge, and that's where you want to, like pushing it in is not going to do more. That's actually slowing down the piece, and it's not actually doing the work. So the polishing compound, you want to do it fast with like low effort on the surface. So don't do this. This is bad. Just kind of right on the surface. And yeah, if you go down here, it's just going to, if you go up top, it's just going to throw your piece down. So always be right here, about 45 degrees from the bottom. And if you're just keeping it at the edge, you can just kind of rotate your piece to get around it. If you're pushing against the tool, you're doing it wrong. Like it should just be like you're just getting the surface. And there's going to be problems when you want to be like, oh, I can't get to there. That's really, we should be going to the Dremel. Like that's not really like doing that. It's just going to, like, you'll see it just put a whole bunch of black stuff all over my piece, which then you have to get off, which. And you need less polishing compound. I want to say this over and over, like, than you think you do. Like, forget where behind you, I think there's another wheel, and you can see like how nasty it gets with like when people overload it, and then it's unusable. You just have gunk. You can't like polish with mud. You want this to be like a surface of a sandpaper. And that's like the most common mistake is people are like, I need more compound. Like, you probably don't. If you can still see the color, you're probably good. You can kind of rotate your piece around like that to kind of like get it in there. And then I'm gonna rush this process, but you're probably gonna be here on your piece for like 30 minutes. Like, so I'm not gonna, but like you wanna do most of your work on the first one, but you can see that these are already shining up. Like, so I'm just gonna do the tops of these, and then we're just gonna move on for the demo. But you try to get through this, and if you're doing a mixture, because a lot of times you can do this, then go to the Dremel, just make sure you just like, oh, I do all the emery on here, then I'll do emery on the Dremel, then I do white diamond, and then I do, so you don't like, polish to a mirror and then try to go back with the other one, because you'll just undo your work. So because you're going to hit over with the Dremel and then you're going to have to go back and do it again. So just make sure you're using one compound, doing it on both. I would do the big chunky stuff on here that you can get to, because the Dremel is going to be less efficient and it's going to be more tedious. So do the big chunks, go back to there, then big chunks on the next wheel, go back to there. And you know, this is also kind of a stylistic choice how polished you want it to be. I mean, I'm of the opinion that you should polish your piece and then you can decide how unpolished you want it to be. But you know, don't, make sure your decision is not based on laziness. That's kind of my advice. Like, your decision on how much to polish it is not based on laziness. Make sure you actually have an actual what you actually want it to be. And then move on to this. And then there's probably enough on there, but I'm just gonna, yeah, and this is what you don't want to do. Don't be that guy. Oh. So we're gonna, you know, just use the surface. And that's enough. That's all you need. Like, this should last us a year, you know? And you can see now it's a lot shinier even, yeah. And this is the sound you want, that kind of like little, and you also notice I'm not splattering the back. If you're getting splattered on the back, you have way too much polishing compound on the wheel. And yeah. And again, I'm bracing it with my offhand and using this hand to kind of control and move it around, but always keeping some pressure underneath because it's going to want to fling down if it gets snatched on something. With all the irregular shapes, it's very likely you're going to get some snags. So just kind of always make sure you have it securely in the left hand and you use your right hand to kind of manipulate it. Or opposite, depending on your handiness, of course, but yeah. And again, I'm always kind of keeping 1 foot forward and 1 foot back just for stability. If you try to stay here like straight like this, you're not going to have any control. So just make sure your center of balance is like you have 1 foot slightly back, 1 foot kind of on the side of the wheel here. And if something needs like extra polishing, like the really rough area, I didn't mention on this one, but you can kind of like when you're on the edge, just kind of push it up into the piece, and it'll do a little bit more work. Like so, like if your area is a little chunky, usually just push it against the piece, but I'll just kind of rotate it up into the piece a little bit to if there's a really rough area. Like this, I'm like trying to make sure I get it out of these crevices, so I'm just kind of like flicking it up a little bit. We're just doing a rush job on here. And then let's go over to the Jeweler's Rouge. And this one's for the first time, so I'll show you how to load it if you have it for the first time. So, and I need to unplug one and plug the other one in. Because this is super legit. But, and you'll notice as soon as I turn this, the red rouge will oxidize to black, so they always look different colors when you load it. It'll immediately. And if you do a good job, this one should be able to get to a mirror polish, which, you know, for a sculpture might not be what you be, but I can see myself in there, so. Yeah, and you can see ourselves in them, so. So that's the basic concept here. A few other things, like if your piece weighs like say like the cabbage, which weighs a lot of pounds, like I will never be able to physically put that under there and polish it. So there are wheel attachments for a regular hand drill. You can use that. It's a little bit less precise than doing on a wheel like this, or you're gonna have to sit there with the Dremel forever. So those are your, but you know, and also there might be physical restraints when dealing with like a big piece that you might have to think about how polished you really want it. But I just want to go through this demo so you can kind of make those choices. But like I have done it with a drill and just attach the wheel to the end of a drill, and then you can just sit there like that. It's awkward. So we're gonna go check on see how the piece we dropped in the acid is doing, because it's probably been about an hour. So I can go show you that. And then the other thing after this, we didn't get this today, but liver of sulfur is what I would do if you wanted a patina on it. So you want it to be like, okay, I don't want it to be shiny. I want it to look like it's weathered. So liver of sulfur, I forget that's like the medieval name. I forget the actual chemical name. I should know that. But you mix a little bit in hot water. Like it comes in like little chunks of rock. You just put it in hot water. It smells like rotten eggs, but it's you know, I wouldn't drink it, but like the MSDS is pretty much non-toxic. And then basically, if you dip your piece in within 5 seconds, you'll get oxides. So you can dip it in hot, or you can brush it on, and then and when you get to the color you want, you just immediately wash it off in the sink. So it's really controllable. You just be like, okay, wash, or put it into another bucket of water and just wash it off. So it's fairly controllable, and it'll go through all the shades from like light purple, like light green, like it can be really pretty when it's really low, to pure black. So like depending on, if you leave it in there for like 10 minutes, you're gonna get like a pure black piece. So if you want that kind of weathered look, but I would just kind of go through the process, and then your piece looks all the same, because after you take it through the angle grinder, you do all the filing, you're gonna have things that are brighter than not bright, and then so you kind of want to, I would suggest going through the polishing process and then put it back on the, at least, you don't have to go all the way to mirror finish, but I would at least go through the first wheel and you know, get it all to the same color, basically, and then you can go to it a bit, like if you want it to look more weathered looking, then go to that. Also, bronze with time will change and oxidize. So, like, and if you have a mirror finish on it, it's going to look different than it does if it was always rough. Like as it ages, it's going to look a different type of dingy. But you know, and if you ever want the oxides off, I mean, a nice home way to get it off is like you could always put it back in the Sparex, even though it won't lose its. You might have to repolish it a little bit, but you probably just have to use the rouge to get the luster back if you want it always to be shiny. Otherwise, you can, you know, it's bronze, it ages, you know, that's what's kind of supposed to do. But sometimes if you leave it outside, it'll get green and then kind of look nasty. But you just put it back in the Sparex, it'll come right off. So let's see what our Sparex did. And this being such a big piece, probably needs another hour, but you can start to see that it's becoming copper colored, less black. So this is going to need probably another hour. I'm not going to throw this back in because I don't know whose this is, and the more we throw in here, the weaker the acid will get. It'll get expended. So I'm not going to throw this giant piece in here for longer, because you guys are all going to use this bath on Friday. So.
And would you normally do this step before the polishing?
Oh yes, yeah. You have to do this before the polishing. Otherwise, you're just going to be taking off those really thick oxides on the polishing wheel, and it's just going to be nasty.
Yeah.
So I would do this first, and then go to the polishing. I would trim up your sprues probably before I do this, but if all the angle grinders are busy, you can throw it in. So the order's not really important there, but. All right. I mean, any other questions about this whole process before we break?
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, no problem.